10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, you're too kind. Too kind. Too kind indeed. Well, it is good to be back. Hey, today is November 4th, 2022. Welcome back again to the Greg Walter Show. We have another excellent guest going to talk about the legalities of being hacked and what you should do and all the recovery stuff and paperwork and why you should get in and why you may not want to get into security and things like that. But first off, let's just take a look around the world of our little niche, right? So, like I said, it is in, let's take a look here, guys. I want to draw our attention to the certain, right now in November. So we've got the elections coming up next week. Things appear to be getting back to normal. We're starting scores of different conferences, meetings, all the events are coming back. It seems as though things are starting to approach a level of normalcy, but not normal, right? As a matter of fact, if we look, the Wall Street Journal says that job growth was okay last week or last month. The recession is either going to happen or not going to happen. Depends on if the Phillies win the World Series or not. If they don't, odds are we're not going to have a recession. There's a whole theory around that, so I won't get into that, but Google it. So jobs are up. Let's see. There's a certain strain for executives right now trying to get guys and folks back into the office. There's a struggle still with the work from home. So that's still going on. What else? We've got, let's see. We've got all sorts of, not anti-capitalist, but because of the strenuous times in economy, the call to capitalism being the answer is raising its ugly head again. The same thing happened back in the 70s when people said capitalism was dead because the interest rates were so high and no one had a job. The fuel costs were super duper high. Every time there's an economic downturn, people start to question whether or not capitalism is a go or a no-go, or if we're at the end of days for capitalism. I don't think so. I don't think anyone really thinks so, but there are folks out there that take the media and the turbulent times and turn it into something catastrophic, which it might be, but I doubt it. We'll get through it. Let's see. Ray is still out there. Sure. We got the Canada report. Again, back to a bunch of shows going on, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know if we saw this, but here's the jobless report and the jobs report for the quarter so far. What I'd like to do now is I will bring in our guest. Our guest tonight is Blair Dawson. Blair, let's bring you in right now.
Hello.
Blair, you there?
I am. Hello.
Hi, Blair. I was just explaining that we're going to talk a little bit about security, but I know you. I've known you for a few months now. Well, yeah, it has been. It's almost since January, so all year, huh? Wow.
Time flies.
Okay. Cool. Maybe you can just give like a 30-second introduction of who you are, what you do, and then I'll hit you up with some questions, and we'll just have a nice little conversation.
Sure. My name is Blair Dawson. I'm with McDonald Hopkins, which is a law firm. I'm with their cybersecurity and data privacy practice group. So we work a lot with incident response. So if you have a ransom event or a business email compromise, we help you navigate that with either threat actor negotiation vendors and also with your notification obligations. Those could be under legal or contractual obligations. We also do some of what we call pre-breach work, which could happen before or after a breach, where we're helping organizations put their incident response plans in place so they're best positioned to respond to a crisis, helping with data privacy policies, and really runs the gamut. But those are the highlights.
Okay, wow. So everything on the legal side, and I heard, actually you said a lot. So security policy, documenting, like what to do if kind of things, right?
Yeah.
And then your services also include if I'm a client or I experience a hack of some sort, I can engage you folks, or that's what you do. You pursue the legal side of that, of cyber security?
Yeah. The normal landscape or framework is that if you have coverage, it will usually come through the hotline that we have with an insurance carrier. So the organization will call that hotline and talk with us right away. Or the carrier might be the first contact and they'll send it to us. Or the third version of that is that there is no coverage and the organization contacts us directly because they know that we do cybersecurity and incident response. Once we talk with the client about what's going on, then we determine what vendors we might need to pull in because there's a lot of technical expertise that we rely on in assessing what legal obligations the organizations might have. They might have contracts with their business partners, and they might have to report to those business partners that there's been an issue. And then there's the legal obligations under state statutes, if there are any federal laws, like federal consumer laws, things of that nature. We help them with that.
Okay. Wow. All right. So let me.
Yeah.
I'll try and draw it down. Correct me where I'm incorrect. So I'm a dealership. I've sold copiers for the entirety of my life. In the last 3 to 5 years, I've gone into IT, and recently I now provide my clients not only copiers, printers, document management, help desk, also cybersecurity services of a certain degree. Let's just say black and white. There's no variance there. So I do supply security services to my clients. One of my clients over the weekend is hacked and experiences a ransomware situation. Now, two scenarios. If I have not engaged with someone like you prior to this incident, what does the dealer in general, what should the dealer do in that case? And then the second scenario is if I have engaged you prior to the incident, what happens at that point? So initially, babe in the woods, I don't have any of the experience. I just actually it's worse because I've resold the security service being provided by someone else. I've white boxed it to a customer, and now they've experienced something. What should I do?
Yeah, you'll usually get contacted or brought in to assist in helping the client recover whatever they can. They might not have a good view of what their environment looks like, so you might be brought in for those purposes in helping in the forensic investigation. There might be a situation where you might have perceived liabilities, and then that's from a litigation perspective, and you'll have to be mindful of that. That's why you really have to be on top of your game with your services, making sure your protocols are in place, your technologies, patching, all of what you would expect. Prior to an incident occurring, I would recommend consulting with a lawyer to make sure that your agreements are as favorable to you as they possibly can be, and that would be limitations of liability, perhaps indemnification provisions, things like that, because you'll want to try to contain whatever your exposure is to the extent that you can.
Wow. Okay. All right. So that makes sense. And before I get to the second part of that question, in your experience, where are dealers and providers in the spectrum? Are most of them just supplying the security service and not paying attention to what happens if and when and all that stuff on the legal side? Or are more of them, and then are they pursuing their own protection services like this, or do the security providers have it built into their agreements with the reseller? It's a complex question, but you see where I'm going?
Yeah, it is, and I don't have an easy answer for that. It really runs the gamut. You'll have organizations that are really sophisticated, and they've thought about how to contain their potential liability and have sophisticated features in place to demonstrate that they weren't negligent and that they're doing their Patch Tuesdays, so to speak, for their clients, things of that nature. Then there are others that are really flying by the seat of their pants, and as you could imagine, the ramifications for them are a lot worse. Their survivability rate is pretty low after an incident because they may be saddled with the cost of doing the forensic investigation and the notification, or they'll be subject to perhaps a subrogation claim. So a client, their insurance might be triggered and they may run with it, but then they look to you and your coverage. And especially if you don't have any limitations in place. We touched earlier on, you asked about the contracts ahead of time. If those don't have any kind of limitations, then your policy is really open to your full limits potentially.
Wow. Do you find that companies that provide the antivirus software and things like that, and they provide it through resellers, do they have an agreement that covers the reseller, or is it pretty much up to the reseller to go out and protect themselves? Or is it a combination?
I think it'd be safest to be being risk adverse. It would be a combination of both. You don't want to be completely reliant. I think about it a lot in terms of a subcontractor, general contractor situation, in like a home building situation. You could potentially, as the general contractor, rely on your subcontractor, for instance, but you wouldn't want to do that as your only safety net. So I think the best practice is to be more engaged and ensure you have some level of protection on your own. There are so many nuances to circumstances, and you may have a circumstance where you're brought in but another party isn't, that could be responsive and provide that coverage, and then you have to wage that whole battle. So you might want to do a stopgap where you have your own coverage, and then if you have to wage that battle with another party who's supposed to be providing coverage for you, you have a cushion in the meantime, because otherwise you may not have the capital set aside to front that, in essence, to recover it later.
Wow.
And I will tell you, coverage actions, that's another side gig that I do, and it takes a long time sometimes. So I wouldn't rely on being able to just quickly write a letter and get a recovery.
Sure. Here's another question. With the copier industry, dealers, so we're typically used to an awful lot of litigation when it comes to leasing equipment, moving equipment. Security got kind of bumped up when the hard drives on copiers were considered a risk. So there's, you have to destroy it a certain way, things like that. Lawsuits due to a loss of business or something around one of our assets, kind of rare. So this is kind of new. Once we're getting into an area that is a new revenue stream, but has a higher degree of risk. I'm asking it. It looks like it has a higher degree of risk to get involved.
Well, yeah, I think it's a risk reward because you're expanding your footprint and the services that you're providing. So obviously there's a whole nother revenue stream, which the way the world is going, it's almost limitless. It depends on how well prepared you are to protect yourself from a legal perspective, but also that you're properly shoring up the services that you say that you're providing. I think when I see providers get in trouble is when they overreach. They want to fortify the relationship with the client that they worked so hard to get in the first place, and they overpromise and underdeliver, or they make promises in a service level agreement that they don't necessarily follow up with later. Once it's done and dusted and signed, they put it aside, they focus on the primary services, and then they forget some of the ancillary services that don't turn out to be ancillary. And to give you one example of that is if any of your colleagues in the industry do backups, for instance, that's an area where I see some major missteps where they fail to do them on a regular cadence. They fail to test them. They fail to do them at all. And then you've got a clear negligence situation. But that would be an easy checklist situation. Like do your definition is done checklist. So make sure that you and your team, these are the key features of your SLA, and you need to achieve these benchmarks.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the backup because we really didn't find out how bad or how efficient our backups were until it was too late. And I mean, I'm going back to the days of tape and mountain backups, and every day you'd have someone plug in a new tape, and it would back it up overnight or whatever, and you take that one tape off site, and then that one day when the disaster took, I've got the tape, I can restore, and the tape's blank, It's been blank for the last 5 years. You know, you don't know that until everything burned down. So that's very similar. So, you know, that happened a couple times. And now security policies, we test. We used to, now it's you don't even have to worry about it. But you have to test the validity of the tape backup. Is the battery, you know, there's another thing. The battery hasn't been charged in 4 years, and we have a blackout, and the network crashed because it didn't have a soft landing. Again, these are olden day stuff. But along those lines, and back to the second part of the question, with your services involved, how would I want to get involved with security? I want to protect myself. I want to engage someone like you. What would we work on together before I would roll out that service to the market?
I think first things first, if you could avail yourselves of any supporting services that a carrier might have, I harken back to insurance a lot just because of the risk reward between some of those losses transferring that risk. A lot of the carriers have different tools that can help you and assess your risks and things like that.
And real quick, carriers refer to your insurance company.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Yes,
that's okay.
I always shortchange it, but yeah, with your insurance carriers, they might have tools available for you. Aside from that, assessing what is your budget, what is the scope of your liability, how many clients do you have, where are these clients, are you housing the data, who's owning the servers, who has the responsibilities for backing up and updating and that kind of thing. And then talk about a lot of things that will also put you in good position, harkening to insurance again, with your insurance carrier, putting things in place that are going to help you and your client, but then you'll also look better for insurance carriers, is do you have an incident response plan? For me, having that framework is so key, and it also is a great, I wouldn't say it's a marketing tool, because you're not going to espouse on that necessarily, but having that backstop in place that you are sophisticated and you have an action plan should a crisis hit. That can also have a secondary benefit where you're outlining gaps, because as you work through the incident response plan itself, when you're talking about who the key team players for the incident response are going to be, contact information, having your policy in there, communications, things like that. How are you going to interface with your clients? You can find gaps in doing the tabletop exercise where you're practicing a scenario, and that might assist you from a business perspective as well, not just having something on paper to prepare for the worst.
So I could implement a response, documented response for the dealership, right? So it wouldn't matter what, I could have a blanket response for all of my customers when it comes to security. Correct? So I can just document it for the dealership, not for specifically for each client, or should I?
If you wanted to go to that level, there are some vendors, forensic vendors, for instance, that do provide that service. That could be a pathway for revenue, but you'd want to make sure that you knew what you were doing. To certainly have an incident response plan for yourself, and then you can implement that with whatever crisis is touching on those retailers, and then that trickle down effect. But if you didn't have that agreement with them to provide that service, I wouldn't do that. For one reason, it would be nuanced to every organization. And then also you'd have to stand behind that. So if you had any gaps in that incident response plan for those trickle down clients, then you hold liability there too. You wouldn't want to do it. This is not something that you want to do as an ancillary throw-in service. Do it for yourself, because you have the information in order to implement and draw that out in a meaningful way. You can advise your clients to do it, and you can point them to resources if you're not going to build out that business line yourself. But I would not take that on, because you might be shouldering an avenue for additional liabilities.
Okay, that makes sense. So you're charged with opening up a business in this channel, in this industry, right? The copier office technology resellers. That's where you work, right?
It's part of where I work. MSPs is just such a growing area, and there's so many avenues into that. So yeah, this is definitely a channel for that.
Okay. So in addition to awareness, what else? No, if I'm a dealer again, what can you do for me, or why would I engage with you and provide services to me or me and my clients, or tell me about that? Because I think we have discussed about generating a document or putting a program together of some sort. But again, back to the original question: what would you do for me?
Yeah, I think it could be both because you could provide it's somewhat of an extension of a concierge service. So you would engage me to make sure that your house is in order, and then lead by example to your business partners, and then provide that channel. You wouldn't necessarily provide those services yourself unless, again, you took that on as a concerted effort as a business line, not as something ancillary. Otherwise, you could make introductions, and again, as a concierge service, that we recommend that you have this in place and talk about all the benefits to that, positioning you and your team in case there is a crisis, limiting your liability, limiting your business loss, business interruption, and also looking more appealing to the insurance market.
Okay. So I'm getting the feeling that, again, I'll look at it through the eyes of a salesperson. Okay. I'm going to have a paragraph talk track around security and this process, whatever that might be. Okay. Once and if something happens. But from the dealership perspective, ownership and management, that is going to be a lot more complex because I'm trying to protect the dealership and my clients. And it involves my existing insurance, my existing legal counsel, and whatever firms I decide to partner with to provide those security services. And then possibly my customer, would they be involved with that?
I think one way to think about it is once you get your house in order with these policies and protocols that are in place, you can then offer them from an experiential point of view and explain why these could be favorable to your business partners and the ultimate customer. And if you wanted to, you could offer those same resources for them to utilize. And there would be a structure for that, similar to what you as the top tier would go through with going through that practice with the pre-breach services, getting that incident response plan in place, for instance. That's the easiest one. And then talk about anything that's important to you as a business that you want to be positioned to address, because that's part of that too is the risk assessment. Like how do you want to prioritize what areas of your business need recovery first or need attention first, and that can be instructional and important to your clients as well when we're talking about business interruption and not having access to customers and things of that nature. How are you going to stand up your email or your web interface as a priority versus other things?
So, okay, let me ask you kind of not a loaded question, but you've been doing this for a while. To me, it seems like this would be a competitive advantage for me going into a possible sale, possible new client, and going through this type of process, or at least utilizing and leveraging it in the sales process, in the presentation, as a benefit of doing business with me. Do you see it out in the field more often? Is it being used as a competitive leverage point in general? Are more and more people talking this way, or are we still not we, or is it still just being sold as a line item part of the monthly payment per end user? Right.
I see. Well, there is the latter, but with respect to the former, I think for one, being able to come to the table and you're thinking about that when you're talking about security and data privacy, and providing those resources, I think that can be a differentiator. You're looking for brand trust and a sophistication level that maybe your competitors don't have because they're not specifically addressing that. And for your clients, that's becoming just ever more and more of a concern. Every company has a data concern, whether it's a manufacturer or a hospital. You have your employees' data. You may have proprietary information. There are a lot of reasons to want to take a specific look at data privacy. And if you can partner with somebody who's already thinking about that, has the tools in place, practices it themselves and can make those connections to those resources in order for you to protect yourself, I think that does go a long way.
Yeah, I'd agree. Kind of shifting gears. Okay, so how did you end up doing this? Because nobody grows up wanting to be a copier salesperson or an office technology. I mean, but here we are. So I'm curious that anyone else who gets in is, what'd you do wrong to get into this?
Yeah, and that's not true because I'm doing this because I couldn't be a copier salesperson.
Whoa.
So I would say how I started is in the insurance industry on the legal side, doing coverage and claims management. And in olden times, cybersecurity, cyber policies was a supplement, almost like a gimmick or sales pitch on a policy, because nobody knew what this meant. There wasn't a lot of direction in the policies, and they were super, super small, like $5,000 or something, for what nobody really knew. That evolved over time, especially I saw a lot of clients looking at reputational harm and also media, that kind of thing, business interruption, that kind of perspective. And it evolved into working with putting portfolios together, insurance portfolios that would contain employment policies, their E&O policies for errors and omissions, of course, crime, things like that, and they'd also have cyber. And as those claims came in, those claims would be incident response, and I really got hooked on that. I really enjoy helping organizations in their deepest moment of crisis. Provide them a framework, provide them a plan, coordinate with all the different vendors that there are. I really love working with the technical folks. I think their level of expertise is just mind-blowing to me, and for recovery purposes, for determining what happened, how a threat actor got in, and also the expertise of threat actor negotiators, the intel that they have. That's an ever-changing framework with the criminals on the other side of the earth that we're typically dealing with. As well as PR firms working with communications, making sure that it's talking from the organization's voice and responding to their audience, their customers and clients in a way that's genuine and meaningful. It's not dry, and it's different every day, and I really like, even if it's businesses that I'm dealing with, it's the people behind the business at the end of the day, and I really like getting them back to where they can make their living and ensure that their employees are making their livings too. It's really rewarding.
Well, okay, I love it. That's a great answer. And here's where I'm a victim, or a victim of ignorance, right? And I shouldn't have done this, but I looked at it literally. Security is another line item. And I enjoy looking. Nothing. One of my big phrases: nothing occurs in a vacuum. Nothing. All right. So it's the whole separation of. We're not going to get in it, but on LinkedIn, you can't put politics in a business forum. Well, you can't keep it out. There's just no way. Everything, and I think what happened with COVID is it really illustrated that everything is connected, from your kids and the school board to the books in the library to health. It blew up, and now I think we're more visionary. We can see where everything does interlace. So when you think about security, I mean, you just hit it. It's reputation, because reputation is a big deal. Actually, it's a huge deal. I mean, how do you run from that if you're in a medical situation or organization that loses its clients' medical records? Okay, run from that. Or you're a media company or something like that. It hurts on the PR side. So interesting. And then HR, right? We think of threats coming from outside of the organization. That's not always true. As a matter of fact, I don't know, you probably have the stats, but you can have an evildoer inside the organization or one that gets outside and attack. So there's all sorts of dynamics.
Yeah, and it could be malicious or unintended. I mean,
but then there's that. Yeah, I mean, it's like I didn't mean to do that, but oops.
Right.
So, and there's probably more of that than I. I don't know about your
Goes
mom
to
and
training.
dad,
Yeah,
but
goes
they
to
open up
training.
every email and every connection and every video. So
Yeah. And that the reputational harm, I would say that every single client that I deal with, especially when you get to the point where they're not operational for a point of time where their clients recognize it, or or worse, they have to do notifications because personal or sensitive information was compromised. That's a huge concern, and getting that messaging in place and doing it just right is really important, because you can really undermine your credibility right from the outset, and that's sometimes if there's not that already in place, and oftentimes when I'm called in there is no template for communications and you're starting from scratch, which isn't terrible when you have guidance, because we deal with this every day. You'll fashion it in such a way that it's typically well received as it can be from the intended audience. But if they go out on their own, oftentimes it's getting ahead of their skis. They're over promising. They're overstating without understanding the nuances in the language. They might say, they might reach out to their Facebook universe and say that they're experiencing a breach and they're working on it. They'll get their website back up. Breach is a very specific word, which means that sensitive information was compromised, and that might not actually be the case. And now you've just done a firestorm. Plus, it's a very sexy word. It's very clickable, reshareable, and so forth. So you want to button down those communications, because the reputational harm, as you alluded to, could be pretty disastrous, or at least a huge headache.
So you swerved into something here, and with COVID, right? The downturn in business, the supply chain, all this. A lot of our dealers really turned internally in terms of training, streamlining internal processes, stuff that you can do when you don't have to worry about delivering and selling, because you don't have anything to deliver and sell. Have you seen an uptick, or what have you seen in terms of training salespeople or internal resources and assets in cybersecurity and in the programs that you're talking about? Have the dealers embraced that and tried to train their folks, their team on that?
Yeah, I see that
Okay.
actually as probably the most readily accepted and implemented action that businesses are taking. It might be because they are feeling the pressures from an insurance carrier that wants to ensure that they have training in place. But almost every business recognizes that that's important. I think everybody knows the kind of the axiom that the weakest link is the human factor. And again, we touched on it. It doesn't have to be malicious. It could be completely unintentional. Right. Everybody's clicked on something they wish that they hadn't clicked on. So just there's some pretty cost-effective trainings that you can do through a whole variety of different training platforms out there. I think everybody's heard about the phishing testing emails that go out and things like that. And there's different ways that businesses can make that better received and more engaging for the workforce, instead of I've heard some horrible examples where it's more a stick than a carrot, where they shame their employee, whoever clicked on it. But there's also the reverse of that, where if somebody they get put into a raffle and they get an Amazon gift card if they pass the test. They
didn't get phished.
Report a phishing. Yeah. And then that can make it, we're all adults and we might poo-poo the idea, but at base, we all still like a sticker. So, it's helpful to do
Smiley
kind of a
faces.
carrot. Yeah.
So you've been, I know I might have asked you this before, but you've been evangelizing to the copier industry for what? A couple years, 3 years, 2 months?
Well, it's been more of a concerted effort in the recent past, within the last year, just because of the shift into, and it's been a training shift from hard paper, and then like you alluded to early on in our conversation about the hard drive, for instance, and the expanding liabilities there. At the end of the day, you're talking about data and handling of that data and handling it appropriately, and you're moving more and more into the technology space where you're storing that data and then the services behind it. So as that's growing, that area is definitely shifting as basically a prime target for folks that need assistance. And just even recently, I think a lot of the conversations that I have on one-on-one, The growth has been so exponential for many of these companies that they just didn't have the resources, and they're kind of like bolting on as they go because they just don't have the bandwidth to also deal with this. But it's coming to critical mass where their businesses are getting enough traction and enough revenue where they have got some serious liabilities and also a larger workforce that they want to protect. And now they've got to think really seriously about cyber coverage, protection for their clients, protection for their own businesses, and they have to carve that time out and look for these resources to prepare for these different things that we touched on, with the training, with the incident response plans, with better contractual language to protect their businesses. There's a whole host of different ways that as you evolve and get larger and more sophisticated, your legal response, your cybersecurity response, your protections have to be equally sophisticated.
Yeah. Okay, so off the top of my head, you've been in trying to talk into our industry for about a year or so. And by ours, I mean office technology, MSPs, things like that. In your journey, and twofold. So what are the strengths of that niche, followed up with what are the challenges and weaknesses that we should be working on?
Okay, that's
framed,
okay.
yeah.
Good one. That's actually, it's a great question, but also a bit of a softball, because I would say one of the strengths is the receptiveness, and not even the receptiveness. I don't even really have to reach out. The conversations that I'm having with really enthusiastic business owners that know that this is an area that they need improvement, they just don't know where to go. And they don't have the resources, or there just isn't that critical mass yet where people know exactly where to go to plug and play. They might be looking to NIST or something like that, which is fine, but it can also be hyper technical and maybe not really suitable for you to implement yourself. But having people come to me and be enthusiastic and really hungry for more information, they recognize it's an issue, and they just don't have a framework for assessing and prioritizing their risk. And then what are we looking at for a budget? How do you assess how you allocate that? Things of that nature. They just need some guidance. But looking for that in the first place, instead of being resistant, which is kind of what it's been prior to that, is like, well, we'll deal with it later. We're it's a security by obscurity. We're under the radar. We're just a manufacturing is a good example of that. Or we're so small, nobody's going to notice us. Yeah, you're a target. On the flip side of that, the weakness, like every business, finding the time to do it. You're growing so quickly, that necessitates the need to do it, but you're always going to find something like, you don't go to the gym because you got to take this conference call. You always push that, your wellness, let's say, your business wellness to the back. I think that might shift not only with the risks that are out there in doing so, but I think also if you're looking for cyber coverage, you're going to have to shift that priority, because cyber carriers, their appetite is getting more and more picky. So you're going to want to make yourself as appealing as possible, and that might shift your priorities there, and you'll have to put your attention towards your best interest and your business wellness.
Well, that makes sense. Okay. And to your analogy about being hungry for information, that is kind of part and parcel of the industry. It's I've been in it for a while, and this industry's been dying for the last 30 years. It's still around, but it's because of the guys who are running these dealerships. Honestly, have a little bit of curiosity, and that what you just described is like, we know we need this, but we don't know what to do, but we're willing to look and even try things, and if they fail, especially if the guys have been around for a while, they've failed at least 5 or 6 times.
I've noticed with this sector in particular, which is also something really appealing to me, the enthusiasm and the energy, the collegiality. Like if you go to a industry conference, for instance, I've never seen such collegiality among such a large group of people. And the entrepreneurship, the innovation, and trying to look for different revenue streams and work with each other to do that, to pull in different resources. It's just so impressive. The energy is really it's buoying. It's very buoyant, and it's fascinating that it's just so stand apart. It's a real differentiator for the industry.
It's very it's interesting to the nth level. It surprises me every time. I take it for granted, actually, when looking at other industries, and no, you don't have the entrepreneurial spirit, and they're heavy competitors, but you see it when you're at the shows. It's like, yeah, we compete, but there's enough room for everyone, and that's the truth. There's plenty of business, especially if you're still around. I'm going to ask you a really loaded question, one that you haven't seen or heard me say.
Okay.
So, you've been working in the industry. Oh, and this can be right up your wheelhouse. I'm putting together another show in the next few weeks, and it is the women in our industry. That's been done before. There's been plenty of specials, a lot of articles. We've when I say we, folks have segmented men and women apart, and the fastest and the best women in the industry. Fine, I get it. That's not where I want to go. I want to see what kind of challenges women have faced in our industry, because there have been tons. We are. I'm not going to tell you this. It's a male-dominated, go industry. It started that way. Just like, I don't know. Was the legal industry like that?
I was on a panel last night for women in leadership and in cybersecurity. So yes,
okay.
This is right in my wheelhouse, and yes, I totally agree with you.
Perfect. So what and I guess I want your input here is, I get that. We want that opinion, but I don't want to make it, because when you say women in and how do women, we want to get to know that. I want to know where their perspective is, but by doing that, I don't want to separate them. I don't know if that makes any sense. But so anyway. Okay,
yeah,
good.
It does. Like last night, there were some men in attendance too, and we're not focusing on gender dissecting issues. It's more of a platform to talk about, like for the cybersecurity panel that I was on last night, talking about what our experience is, how we got into it, like letting people that this was focused on folks that were getting into the business, and how can we get into the business, and how can we make ourselves look more attractive, how can we learn more, that kind of thing. I think that's helpful. I think also always being out there in a face for mentorship. I think people that are facing any challenges, whether it's gender-based or not in the industry, being able to reach out to somebody and talk to somebody about it, and how did you overcome it, because a lot of these same issues come up over and over again. I think that's extremely helpful.
Okay, well, I'm going to do that. So the struggle is mine, to try and bring something together that isn't, separating. I don't want it to be a separate thing, but it is. I know it's complicated. I think the biggest compliment that anyone can give anybody trying to get into an industry or into some sort of social norm, I don't care. I don't care if you are purple. I don't care if you have long hair. I don't care if you have short hair. Remember when that was an issue? The guys that had long hair? Oh, hippie. I don't care. All right, tell me what you got. Like what we're talking about right now. I'm not trying to neutralize or degrade anyone. I don't care. We're having a great conversation. So I want to get that out on the table. And coming from my standpoint, I started my blog in a certain way. We can talk about it another time. But I've known lots of women in our industry, and I've seen a lot of challenges, and I've known a lot of issues where we're not very pretty. So yes, I'm wondering if that's still around. I don't need you to answer that, but that's where I want to go. And then I think you already answered my question to a certain extent, that there is something there. But do you think is it easier or more difficult today than it was before? And what do you see in the future? And we'll talk about the men and women getting into the industry and sales, technology, real general.
Yeah, I think it's, I don't want to say it's easier, but I think we're reaching, to use critical mass again, I think we're reaching a critical mass where more women are interested in entering the industries, and they have the support to do it, and they have mentors that they can look to, which I think is important, whether they be men or women. So it's kind of like the idea of STEM in grade schools, like providing like girls camps for STEM, for science and technology. Same kind of principle, just in the adult world. Let there be some stories out there about how you came up in the industry, and also what resources are out there. Give them a leg up.
Perfect. Well, Blair, we could talk forever. As a matter of fact, I've had one of these shows go for 2 hours and 59 minutes. Of course, that was a bourbon show, so.
Late night.
Yeah, it did. It started early and ended late, but it was great. I haven't watched it yet. But thank you very much, Blair. And if anyone wants to get to you, what's the email address?
Sure. And just to say, always a pleasure. I love talking with you, so thanks for having me. You can reach me at bdawson@mcdonaldhopkins.com. You can find me at mcdonaldhopkins.com on the website. And then, of course, as everybody on the universe is, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me there as well.
Perfect. All right, Blair, thank you very much. And for everyone who's watching, thank you. We'll have another show next week. And someday in the near future, we'll have a whole list of all the shows, post-production, all sorts of cool stuff. So until next time, take it easy.